joining us. Clyde is joining us also. Right. Hello. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching 448 Psychosis, our production this evening at the New Diorama Theatre. And I do hope you, well, quote unquote, enjoyed the production. That's a really sort of difficult phrase to say, really. Enjoy is an interesting word. It's a very powerful piece, and I'm sure you've all been affected by it this evening. I should say, first of all, that my name is Paula Garfield, and I'm the Artistic Director of Definitely Theatre, and also the Director of this production that you've watched this evening. I'm privileged to work with four amazing actors, very talented actors that have made my job really, really smooth. The play, 448 Psychosis, sorry I'm nervous, I'm going to make sure I'm signing fluently, was written by a playwright called Sarah Kane, and it was her final play that she wrote before she tragically committed suicide. She wrote 4 other plays in her life. This is her 5th and final. And her style of plays was quite controversial, actually. She really liked to provoke audience members. She really liked to challenge them. She really liked to make them think, gosh, what's going to happen? So she actually wrote this play in 1999, which is almost 20 years old. So today's panel is going to talk about 20 years ago, what was happening in mental health services. And in the last 20 years, have we seen improvements? Have we seen a decline? Or have we seen services remaining the same? So I'd like to thank my volunteers who are in the panel this evening, and just like you to introduce yourselves first before I'll kick off with my first question. And also we are live streaming on YouTube and Facebook, so just to let you all know that this evening. 10 people are watching. Hello, there's 10 people.
Hello, my name is Richard. I'm an ex-service user. I've been in the psychiatric system for 25 years.
My name is Karen. I'm from Ireland, and I'm a service user and have been for 11 years. My name is Herbert. That's my name sign, and I've been working in mental health for 30 years. I'm now retired.
Oh. And hello everybody, my name is Jim Cromwell, and I've worked in mental health services with deaf people for the last 20 years, and 10 years with adults, and 10 years with children and families. Right, so thank you for that. I'm going to ask a couple of questions first and then open it out to our audience. So my first question, over the last 20 years, have we seen services in mental health improve for deaf people? What are your opinions?
I was in mainstream psychiatric hospital for 22 years, and all the treatment took me 22 years before I found specialist psychiatric hospital. And I was in there for 1 year and recovered really quickly. So 20 years now. But the awareness of availability of service is not very out there. It took me 22 years.
I'd say that in 20 years, well, I was a child at the time, so really I can only speak for 11 years. The mental health services in Ireland were really lacking, and I have gone to the Blue ward at the end of 10 years, but if I hadn't been transferred, I wouldn't be here today. I have worked for a long time in mental health, and in 30 years I have seen an improvement. In the past, for example, deaf staff are not allowed to work in mental health, and we've seen changes happening all the time. We see more and more deaf people become clinicians, qualified psychotherapists, etc. So this is really good.
Last one. Well, save the best till last. Okay, my view of your question is incredibly complicated, very hard to answer. You know, I mean, my gut, my view, mental health care for deaf and hearing people over the last 20 years, I've seen a kind of progressive decline. it's been going downhill through the austerity cuts, through funding cuts, and I think both deaf and hearing people are struggling to access services. You know, they may go to their GP and then obviously delayed referrals, and then their condition worsens before they finally get given the services and treatment that they need. And I have to say that is both for hearing and deaf people. I've sort of seen this decline, but I suppose, you know, deaf people are on a less steep trajectory really, because if we compare it to 20 years ago, there were very few services for deaf people. You know, people didn't understand what deaf services meant, and maybe we'll delve into that subject a little bit later. But, you know, whereas now I think we've seen the growth, you know, small growth of services for deaf people. I think, you know, 20 years ago there was just one service, wasn't there, for sort of, you know, children and families, and now there are 10, says Herbert. Can I just clarify 10 what? 10 deaf child and family mental health services, deaf CAMS, throughout the UK. There are 10 now established, whereas adult, you know, I mean, yes, we've got how many?
Yeah, we're about 4.
Three or four that are, you know, one is, you know, closing, but 3 or 4. And how many patients, can I ask, does each facility cater for?
Herbert says inpatient wards, if you talk about that, there are about 14 beds covering the whole of England.
Gosh, that's
Not Wales and Scotland. They have their own governments, but it's for NHS England funding. The free referral covers the entirety of England. In Wales and Scotland, we need a special, different contract.
And just to add to that, what that means is that there aren't that plethora of services and support. It's very sparse, it's very few and far between. There are some more, you know, for deaf children and young people, and, you know, if a child is born deaf, you kind of, you know, there's some support there, you know. I mean, for hearing people, we've got, you know, child psychiatrists or psychologists who could nurture and work with a child, you know, up to when they're 18, you know, and if they are still unaware, you know, that's the point, is, you know, where do they go after that? You know, where's the kind of, you know, referral, where's the transition services? As we just said, you know, adult services are very few and far between, and they're often full. You know, how do you finally access them? You have to sort of, you know, be quite severely ill to get there. I think there's a gap sort of post-18 for some people, and there is, you know, deaf forensic services. But, you know, how do you get in them? You know, I mean, how is it if you do, you know, get arrested, go to court, and are in trouble, you might get access to them that way. Paula, do you feel that the service is improving a bit, but due to the austerity cuts, due to the funding cuts, we've seen, you know, the decline of services? And I have to say, the reason why I picked 448 Psychosis to perform is that I feel that mental health is still a huge taboo subject within the deaf community. And maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, but there seems to be this huge taboo, and people don't share it, people don't talk about it. I mean, I was anorexic for 10 years, and, you know, it was a topic that nobody talked about. My own family didn't want to talk about that. And people would say to you, you know, you've had mental health issues, you had anorexia, and as I read more about the subject, I realised absolutely they're right. I mean, there was no support, you know, and it was my own twin sister, Fifi, that really sort of, you know, supported me a lot and enabled me to sort of, you know, recover. But do you feel that the mental health is still a taboo within the deaf community? Do you feel it's still a hidden topic, or do you feel it's more widely discussed?
For my age range, I think that services were broader and the taboo got reduced, people became more open. But it's true that there's not enough information about mental health in education, there's not enough awareness.
So Richard. First time I was stressed, I couldn't do, I didn't know what stressing was. Lots of clinical depression, fuck that, we're talking about, you have mental health, because the section, no idea what mental health was, because at that time, the community never talked about it. But now, here was more people talk about criminal, about the service, support service, or even community is massive compared to the community.
Yeah, Herbert, I think that the problem is actually when you look at deaf and hearing services, hearing people do benefit from greater amount of information, they hear stuff on the radio, etc. Whereas it's much more few and far between for deaf people. They don't get as much information. And often we associate the sign of mental health, because we point to the head, to being crazy or being and so there's a lot of awareness work that needs to be done, a lot of education. There's not enough promotion, and we should actually talk about this regularly. And I'm so pleased to see that there's a play here today that raises the question, both deaf and hearing people get mental illness or psychosocial issues, and what matters is the different way of communicating that.
Would you like to comment, Jim? Do you feel that it's a taboo or less so now? Jim, I feel I can't comment because I am actually hearing, these are my deaf members of the panel, and I think I'm more of an outsider looking in. But I suppose my own personal view, if I compare it with the hearing community, the mainstream community, yes, as Herbert says, there is a lot of information out there, through the media, but there's a lot of also misinformation. There's a lot of, stories you read in, magazines of whereas schizophrenic patients are all, crazed violent killers, and that's not right. And I think there is a lot of misinformation and a lot of wrong information out there. And I think whereas if you compare to the deaf community, there's no information. So it's a kind of, I feel that, if you compare to the mainstream, yes, there is, I think, a lot more shame about mental health, and you don't want to be seen as having, mental health issues or therapy. No, thank you, don't want to do it. And I think perhaps maybe some deaf people are more open to the idea of therapy because they don't have that kind of stigma attached to it, I think.
In Psychosis Hospital about because they don't understand my need of communication, my need of communication style and written. So I'm welcoming people to written because they think I'm staring and said eating again, about 22 years of fire all the time because communication broke down. When I went to the National Doctor at the Bluebell Ward, on the first morning when I woke up, I was in a wheelchair. I came up to my room, and the first thing I saw was the nurse, and she actually said, "Good morning." I was like, "Back off." Went back into my room, shut the door, waited about 5 minutes, came out again, said, "Good morning, the breakfast is ready." And that was it.
And that's it, isn't it? That communication, that's the key, that's the pivotal thing.
Can I say something? Yeah, I had a similar experience when I was transferred from Ireland to the Bluebell Ward. When the nurse arrived and started saying hello and good morning, I thought, wow, is this person a friend? No, it's just a nurse. I couldn't believe she was communicating with me in Italian. And Herbert says, yeah, there were 9 deaf people who came from mainstream psychiatry and were placed in the Bluebell Ward, and every single one of them was absolutely flabbergasted, shocked. We couldn't believe. There was a lot of disbelief in actually being able to understand the nurses and the doctors, and to receive empathy and understanding. And there was an understanding of the community, the language, the culture, and that actually was a foundation for improvement. And when that got started and staff understood that, they understood, they had a clear idea.
I mean, you watched tonight's performance. Do you feel it rings true as a former user of the services?
Yes. The way they dress, the way they speak, the labeling of the medication, all that. Yeah, I can identify to a lot of things. It's quite, it had a lot of impact.
So, to remember suicide, they were tried, and they estimate what people feel when they're suicide, when they see at the end of the day, 2 characters by themselves, for me, suicide 10 times, or private individual experience, or the I've been there. It's very, very good.
I think tonight's the first time I've seen the play, and I absolutely loved it. Incredibly powerful, and you know, is it a metaphor or is it a simile? I'm not sure, but you know, I think, you know, my view of Sarah Kane's plays, I mean, yes, the topic of 4.48 is about mental health or mental illness, but I think that the general themes are about that disconnect, that disassociation with the world, you know, and what is, you know, mental health? It's having that kind of moment of disconnect, and whether it is therapy or medication that, you know, repairs that connection and resolves it. And I think that's the really interesting thing, and that doctor-patient relationship, and really sort of, you know, getting that connection. It's about connection, you know, and having that connection to society, having that network rather than that, you know, enclosed disassociation. And I really enjoyed the doctor trying to communicate with some of the deaf patients. Oh, absolutely, you know, but there was no empathy in some of their characters. There was no kind of doctor-patient good relationship. There was one scene with the interpreter, you know, with their badge and lanyard around their neck coming in, and just to see that doctor sort of talking and an interpreter sort of signing, I was like, you know, where is that kind of, where was that kind of a relationship? So where is that kind of direct relationship? And, you know, finally seeing a direct relationship, I think that's where you can finally, you know, sort of start that kind of, you know, therapy and that treatment. And it isn't always successful, but you really have to meet someone face to face to really develop that relationship. You know, if it is via a third person, you know, how could you do that? Paula, I mean, reading Sarah Kane's work, she talked about the fact that doctors didn't try to understand her. They just sort of, you know, threw this medication at her. You know, oh, you're behaving normally again. You can go and fit in society. Off you go. And I think, you know, that's a really interesting analogy. Right. Let me open it up to the audience. Are there any questions that audience members would like to ask our panel this evening? We are live, so if you can please sign your question, I will then repeat it for our viewers at home.
Oh, wow. Knowing that you've been there for 22 years, what took you so long to be transferred to a deaf ward?
Just relaying that question to our audience at home. Over to Richard.
Some respond communication. The thing because I can't speak, the thing I can't understand everybody, I can't. They're like mobile to the psychiatry, doctors, nurses, everybody else, fighting. And they covered up thinking because I can't speak the same in person. So after 22 years, when I want to build out the psychiatry could die, psychiatry could die, but the point of communication is staying standing, that identity, that's the key thing, that's the great thing. But 22 years was doctors think they know everything better than me.
Interesting. Thank you, Richard. Any more questions from our audience this evening?
Congratulations, what a brilliant play.
And thank you.
There were some images of flashback. I think I had flashback 24 years ago when I was at my first job at university in Birmingham. It was the mental health unit at Queen Elizabeth Hospital, and it really hit me to see deaf patients there with a variety of psychosocial issues, mental health issues. And when I walked in there, I was quite young and quite untrained. And so it was a difficult situation. And then after about a year, I left that job. But I have a question. 24 years ago, what struck me, I mean, the situation was similar to what was portrayed, but today is different. But what is different? Can you be more specific?
Just relaying the question. Do you think, just to double check, do patients behave the same as they did now 20 years ago?
Well, before the focus was on medication, and now with more research, we emphasize therapy and relationship. And I think that now it's better than before. The psychotherapy is, for me, the best solution. Herbert says, I totally agree with that. In those days, we were just thinking quick fix, throwing some medication at the patient, and there was no idea of the patient's charter, becoming more aware of the patient, having better training, a better understanding, and also a change in attitude, and not look at mental health as being a separate issue to health. In meetings when the patient wants to say something and contribute to their own case, they are welcome there today, whereas in the past they weren't.
20 years ago, after I was prison on drugs, and 20 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, not so many psychiatric nurses. 20 years later, now we are that people become trained psychiatric nurses, make the doctor. But for me, mainstream alcohol and drugs, and now we are five different drugs. So the person on the mainstream world are more mixed up now. But Bluebell is more person focused on issues of what creating problems. They actually draw problems of their own logic. Our problems are out of the self. I have therapy with my psychologist performer, and it's the best thing ever.
Wow, that's amazing. And a couple of nights ago, I just wanted to share with you, an audience member watched 448 and actually then sent me a Facebook message after and said, I've got a question about some of the scenes, and I replied and I explained, and she said, your plays inspired me, and I was like, well, what do you mean? She said, I'm deaf and I've been thinking about becoming a counsellor, but was a bit unsure about what I wanted to do. But now from seeing your play, that's it, I'm going to go off and become a qualified counsellor. So that's a really kind of positive message, and I'm so pleased that we're inspiring deaf people to get involved in mental health services and become a qualified counsellor. Let's have a time check with my team members. Oh, 7 more minutes. Any more questions from our audience members this evening?
Deaf workers in mental health. I mean, we need psychiatric nurses, maybe other educators. Do you think that's the right way forward, or do you feel that there might be some reservation? What would be the best path?
Can I just make sure I understood that and just relate that?
Herbert says yes, that has also changed. In the past, when before we had deaf people working as professional, hearing could only have a guess as what being deaf was. They really didn't know how to empathize with deaf people, and deaf people felt alienated from the hearing professionals. Whereas in situations where both the caregiver or the doctor and the patients are both deaf, there is a different dimension to the relationship. Deaf people are encouraged to go and join the deaf community, to see all the different expressions of art in theater and different artistic expressions they can discover in the deaf community. Then they can, through training, become more open, invite deaf people into lectures. There's training by role modeling, and the whole situation has changed. But without deaf people, then nobody can learn from deaf people. It is important to have deaf professionals involved in mental health and deafness. When patients are getting aggressive or shouting, and a hearing patient might be more affected and think, oh, there's an issue there, and for a deaf person might just be like, bah, no worries, it's just a bit upset or something.
And I think that's part of the definite improvement that we've seen over the last 20 years. If we go back, 20 years ago, the deaf unit was full of hearing staff. The doctors, the nurses, they were all kind of the professionals, if you like. And maybe there were nursing assistants that might be deaf, the unqualified ones. whereas these, you know, hearing members of staff were unaware of, you know, deaf culture, language, you know, they couldn't sign and so forth, but they kind of, you know, didn't have that kind of influence from the community or awareness of the deaf community, whereas deaf staff members have that empathy, they have that innate connection, and it's about working together. It's about working.
Like we do here.
Absolutely, working in these partnerships, not having, you know, this status gap, you know. And now we've had more deaf people who've had all these training opportunities, and we need more. But you know, we are closing that gap, and there are more, you know, deaf professionals. We've got, you know, clinical psychologists who are deaf. We've got qualified nurses who are deaf, occupational therapists who are deaf. You know, we're closing that gap. But I think, you know, hopefully it should be, you know, a full deaf team in the future.
Right.
So, but we're not quite there as yet. Need more deaf leaders, absolutely. And we see a lot where hearing people run services for deaf people, no matter what the service is. And I'd love to see more deaf leaders. I know there's someone with a burning question.
Well, I'm going to ask a controversial question. I know that all in the deaf community, I mean, we are aware that the size of our community is small. And how do mental health deaf professionals keep the boundaries when, as we do, we bump into our friends in the deaf community and we bump into our own patients or into the people that we care for? So what are the professional boundaries for deaf professional and still kind of keeping alive in the deaf community?
And I just relayed that question. I think it's a very good question and a very important question to ask.
Herbert says, oh, well, I agree to the bottom line of your question. The boundary is that we have to keep, we have a double boundary, or triple one. One is in terms of getting the skills and the confidentiality to training and knowing what's the best way and how to seek advice. Personally, I have trained a lot of members of staff on how to cope, coping strategies with how to deal with confidentiality when you are bumping into friends or when you know the people you're treating and so on and so forth. Like if you see someone that you know in the pub, maybe you have to make a decision of leaving the pub and not staying there. You have to kind of find strategies. If someone is asking, oh, do you know each other, etc., maybe you just pass on the word to someone else. Say, well, you introduce us, I'm not going to introduce that person. And I think the same sort of thing applies to hearing people. If they are doctors in a small village and they know all the families, and so the boundaries for confidentiality would be the same as rural doctors, I would imagine.
Has that happened to you? It hasn't happened to me, I should say, as a you know, hearing person. You know, at 5 o'clock I shut the door and I'm out to my hearing world. You know, I don't socialise with deaf people. But you know, hearing doctors, hearing psychologists, psychiatrists, or whatever, you know, if they do become ill themselves, you know, they don't go to see local psychiatric services. They go, you know, to services further away. Obviously, deaf people can't do that. But deaf staff with deaf patients, absolutely. I think before you start the therapy, you have to kind of really have that conversation, open and frank, agree those boundaries, you know, really talk about it. You know, and you know, the first time I meet deaf clients, and we're going to start 10 weeks of therapy, we do have a chat, and if we do bump into each other, perhaps outside in town or the village, and if we do see each other, you know, I won't say hello, I will look up, I will look down. If you want to say hi to me, then I will reply. Kind of have that conversation, you know, when you first start the therapy, so you've got that kind of clear communication established and you know what you're going to do if it does happen, and, you know, have those rules that you're both aware of.
And I'd like to add one more thing. When we receive a referral for assessment, we are careful about choosing who is going to provide the therapy. We can't be like related or be close friends or whatever. So there is a bit of a background search of knowing exactly who's going to be the best suited therapist for that person, so that there's no, you know, too close for comfort.
Very interesting. Thank you, panel members. Let me just double check. I'm going to ask, this is the final opportunity for someone to ask a question before you head for home. Oh, I think we've run out of questions. But I'd like to say thank you so much to my panel members this evening for having this really, really interesting discussion. I'm so grateful to you all for attending. So, yes. And one person was unwell today, and Karen is a last-minute replacement on panel singing. So thank you so much to Karen for attending. I'd also like to thank Brigitte, our last-minute sign language interpreter, who was just watching the play and forced into working afterwards. Thank you so much, Brigitte. Have a lovely evening and a safe journey home. Thank you. Good night. Well,